There are now an estimated 51 million displaced people around the world. That includes both refugees and those who have been forced to flee their homes, not necessarily their countries. A senior advisor at the nonprofit Refugees International says there are more displaced people now than at any point since World War II, and about 80% of them are women and children. I asked her why.
So it's a lot of different factors, and it depends on the country and the context. So for instance in Syria, there are a lot of men who have been, obviously, who've decided to fight, who've been part of the paramilitary actions. There are a lot of kidnappings and disappearances taking place. And then sometimes, and this is true all over, when violence and conflict is coming into a community, the men will stay back to protect what they can, whatever property they can, because they're leaving everything, or they'll stay close by, whereas the women and children will move on into a more secure area.
When it comes to caring for refugees, what are some of the challenges in keeping up with safety and education?
I think one of the hardest things for even people in the education system who are trying to work with kids is the trauma they've suffered. And so even if the schools are there and they have enough teachers and there's enough facilities to actually hold these kids, they're coming in having witnessed people being killed or perhaps tortured or kidnapped, a parent taken away, obviously having fled everything and everyone they know. So it's hard for them to learn. Language is often an issue. So kids end up in countries where they don't speak the language, and so they're starting all over again, and that's an obstacle on top of trauma. Sometimes there just aren't schools open for them. So in some countries, particularly if people come in without official legal documentation or permission, they're not allowed to access the schools.
Is there any kind of international law that is out there meant to protect refugees?
Yeah. So there's something called the Refugee Convention, and that was created in the 1940s after World War II. Countries came together and agreed on certain basic protections that everyone should have if they fled for reasons usually associated with conflict or violence. Interestingly, Lebanon, Jordan, the countries surrounding Syria are not signatories to the convention, and yet they really are the most generous countries right now, the best example of what it means to give refuge. 1 in 4 Lebanese is now Syrian, or people in Lebanon is a Syrian. Whereas at the U.S. border, it's very hard to get in, even when people are seeking protection, and when they do, they're detained immediately.
Looking past the various conflicts, what are some of the challenges in terms of reintegrating people back to society, whether it be in their new home or if they have to go back to where they came from?
So in terms of coming into a new home, again, of course it always depends, but trauma, again, becomes a huge factor. Language, customs, cultural practices. Is there a community around that's willing to accept the people? Are they welcoming, or are they do people feel forced upon and therefore are not welcoming? And then in terms of return, that can set up a whole different set of dynamics. So for instance, I was in South Sudan shortly after it became a new country, and obviously right now it's in terrible turmoil. And there were thousands and thousands of people coming back, which was amazing. People coming from all over, mostly neighboring countries, but from all over. And I was actually spending time with the government observing the process of actually issuing nationality documents. In Myanmar, I was there recently, or Burma. There is also quite a big movement of preparation for return. The tens of thousands of refugees who live on the Thai-Burma border. And for them, there's nothing to come back to. Their homes that they fled 20 or 30 years ago just basically don't exist anymore. The community's gone, the livelihood is gone, the schools are gone. So that's going to create a whole different set of concerns upon return.
Sarnata Reynolds, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.